Hi. Drawing poses is tough. It's not exactly something that you learn to do overnight, and it requires a lot of time and effort to get good at. But artists, I practice all the time. I put a lot of effort in my pose drawings and I'm still not improving. Well, worry not, my art nerds, because I think I got a couple of reasons why your pose drawings may not be improving. Reason number 1. You are not deconstructing the human body into shapes. Each part of the human body can be simplified into one of these 3 basic shapes: a sphere, a cube or a box, and a cylinder. Typically you use the sphere for the head, and the joints. You use a box shape for the ribcage and pelvis, and you use the cylinder for the limbs. Now, this is how I personally like to deconstruct the human body. I feel that this is the method that works for me. You can see how I used a combination of spheres, boxes, and cylinders to make a pretty lifelike human figure, even though it's in this very neutral pose. Now, a lot of artists online will tell you that you can simplify the rib cage into a circle shape, or into an oval shape rather. And yeah, while that is true, while you can certainly draw the rib cage as an oval shape, I feel that it's a lot more difficult to put it in different positions and orient it in different directions, especially when you're doing like really extreme angles, such as like a bird's eye view or an ant's eye view or a really dynamic shot. It's, at least for me, it's very difficult to work with this. It's easier to use a box shape because the box, you can easily tell the position of the box. You can tell where it's facing. It has a very simple form, so it's not difficult to understand. Whereas with this, you really need to have an understanding of the shape of the rib cage to be able to use this oval shape. So for beginners, I would say if you are using an oval shape, you would probably be better off using box shapes, but maybe that's just a me thing, I don't know. You really don't want to skip this phase of the drawing, because this part is what makes or breaks your drawing. If you rush through this phase, chances are that your drawing is probably not gonna look that good, hence why you're struggling with poses. Like, I'll give you an example. If you're drawing like an arm or a leg or something, let's just say that I'm drawing an arm. Avoid doing this. This is not drawing in shapes, in my opinion. I would not say that this is drawing in shapes. Sure, it can work for drawing poses, but drawing like this, not actually drawing the cylinders and the spheres and the joints, it's gonna make the whole process a lot more difficult when it comes to drawing poses that are foreshortened. Whereas something like this paints a much clearer picture of what's actually going on with the pose. So again, do not skip this step, do not rush this step. Do not go straight into the final anatomy and all of the muscles and everything like that, because your drawing is going to look weird. Your posing is not going to look natural. Some professionals can get away with not doing this and go straight into drawing the muscles, but that's because they have years and years of experience, which you probably do not have. If you're watching this video, you probably do not have that experience. So again, do not skip this phase, do not rush this phase, do not do this, do this, and I promise you, your pose drawings are gonna improve massively. Let me show you an example. Look at this drawing. This is an example of how you can deconstruct the human body to be able to form a pose. And just from doing something like this, effectively deconstructing all of the parts of the body into those 3 shapes that we talked about, the box, the cylinders, and the spheres, we can turn a simple sketch like this into something like this, you see how much of a difference like just not skipping the construction phase makes? If you put enough effort into this phase of the drawing, then I promise you, your pose drawings are going to improve no matter what. Second reason why you may not be improving at drawing poses is that you do not have a good enough understanding of the human body. Now, I'm not saying you should immediately stop drawing, go learn anatomy and all of the little muscles of the body. In fact, this point has almost nothing to do with learning muscles or anything like that. Now, what I'm saying that you should learn is not all of the muscles and nooks and crannies and humps and bumps of the human body, but instead you should learn all of the proportions of the human body. Sure, having all of those tiny details in the muscles would look good if you knew not to draw the head too big, or if you knew not to draw the arms too small, or if you knew not to draw the legs too long. Now, unfortunately, that's just something that you're gonna have to research. I will have a video dedicated to that, maybe, eventually, no promises, but in this video, I can give some basic tips. Now, and keep in mind, this is for the average male character. First of all, the head should be big enough to fit into the ribcage. If it does not, that means you either drew the head too big or you drew the rest of the body too small. Now, obviously, that's going to vary from character to character. It's not a set rule that you have to follow, but it's just good to keep in mind. Now, second point, the shoulders are usually 3 heads apart from each other. So, in this space between the 2 shoulders, we would be able to fit 3 of this character's heads. Third tip, the elbows are generally at the same level as the belly button. So if I were to flesh this character's anatomy out just a little bit, so if you look closely, you can see that the elbows, the elbow joints, these tiny circles, are at the same level where you would typically find the belly button. Fourth point, the wrists are found at the same level as the crotch. Fifth point, the hands should be big enough to cover the entire face. This goes for every single character that is not caricatured or exaggerated in some way. Like, you can even test this right now. If you just take your hand and just put it over your face, you're gonna see that your hand is just about big enough to be able to cover your entire face. And sixth point, the legs, the entire length of the leg, not just up to the knees where I drew, but the entire length of the leg should almost, not quite, but almost be twice as big as the torso. The third reason why you may not be improving at drawing poses is because you are not using references. Now, I just want to say something real quick. Using references is not cheating. Matter of fact, if you think about it, when you started drawing for the very first time, did you draw from imagination? Of course not. You were probably watching an episode of Dragon Ball Z when you randomly decided to pause and try to draw whatever you saw on the screen, because at the time you were just starting out. You had to copy from somewhere. That's just how people learn. The same goes for drawing poses. If you know that you cannot draw a pose, why would you consider using a reference as cheating in the first place? So use references. If you're still a beginner, I would say avoid references with a lot of foreshortening, because those can be very frustrating to draw if you feel like you're not getting them right. But you should choose a reference that's at least going to challenge you a little bit, because you do need to get out of your comfort zone a little bit so that you can actually improve, but you do not want to choose something that's going to be too challenging for you, or else you're just going to get frustrated. The last tip that I have is to use the line of action. Put simply, the line of action is essentially an imaginary line showing the general flow of a pose. In this clip, you can see me laying down the line of action before I do anything else. Before I draw any other part of the body, I always lay down the line of action. After that, I make use of all of the different shapes that we had talked about the box, the sphere, and the cylinder to make a pose out of a figurine. The line of action is especially useful for some beginners and intermediates because it helps you place the character in a space, and it's there as kind of a reminder to say, hey, that the body is bending in this direction, the body is curving in this direction, the gesture of the pose is flowing in this direction. So in this drawing, the line of action actually goes something like this, and it can be a very useful tool if you're having a lot of trouble following a reference that has some kind of like dynamic posing. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. Remember, deconstruct the human body into shapes. Learn the proportions if you don't know them already. Learn basic proportions. You don't need to study anatomy. You don't need to study all of the muscles of the human body. Just knowing the basic muscle groups and knowing the proportions is enough. Remember that you can have good posing without having good anatomy. Anatomy does not make everything. Use references because that's how you learn. You copy from somewhere until you eventually learn how to do it by memory. Don't be ashamed. Don't think that using references is cheating. And if you need it, make use of the line of action. Now get out there and start drawing poses.